So this video is going to focus primarily on using the paint bucket tool for solid colors and gradients. So there's also going to be another choice of patterns, but that I'm going to show you in a separate video. So when we start exploring what we're going to do for the background, again, you have a choice of doing a solid color, or if you want to do some of the gradients or a pattern. So the easier one to show you is the paint bucket. You want to first make sure that your letters are invisible. So it's just clicking the eyes on each of the layers. You also want to make sure that your background is active, which means that it's shaded in a light gray like that. So you don't want to be on any other layer except for the background, because that means that whatever we use here, it's only going to be affecting this background. So we're going to go to the paint bucket. The shortcut's the letter G. As you click on a tool, you're going to notice that your options are going to appear up on top. So you want to make sure that you're, first of all, on the regular paint bucket tool. You want to make sure that you're on foreground, which means that whatever you dump in, it's going to be this foreground color here. The mode is going to be normal, the opacity 100%, tolerance is 32. So all of these things are the default settings, so you just want to make sure that that's what this says up on top. There's probably no reason for anything to change except maybe from foreground to pattern, because you might have explored patterns. So you just want to make sure it says foreground. So to pick a color, it's going to be this one right here. It's going to be the top left color, the one that's overlapping what they would be calling the background color. So to change it, right now it's set to blue. To change it, you're going to double click on that space there. So you get this bar, and you can drag the bar up and down to give you different families of color. And then in here, you can work with tints and shades and, colors where you add black and white to. So you can see right now it's set to current, but this would be the new one that it would pick. So if I cancel it, nothing happens. But if I wanted to change the color, I would have to say OK, and you can see that it changes. So once you select a color, you're on the paint bucket tool, you just click anywhere in here, and bam, you got yourself a color. If you wanted to change the color, it would just be resetting it, and then dumping it in. It's that simple. So if you wanted to do gradients instead, it's the same button, but you're going to right click in this space, and then you have an option called the gradient tool. Another way that you can jump to different tools that share the same button is holding down the shift key as you push the shortcut button. So if I hold down the shift key and push G, you can see that I'm jumping from different, from the paint bucket to the gradient. It also jumps to the pattern bucket as well. So I'm going to make sure that it shows gradient, and you know you're on the proper tool when it shows up in this first area here. So the next area right here dictates the type of gradient you want. There are all different presets, which you see when you hit this drop-down menu. There's also other presets that you can explore over here, all these libraries. So if you click on one and say OK, it gives you all these different varieties of gradients. There's hundreds and hundreds of gradients. So I'm going to go back to the default menu, or the simple ones, I think they called it. No, not simple. Let's see. Color harmonies. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know which one it was when it was at the beginning. So I was trying to figure out how to get back to these default settings. I call them default because it gives you a little bit of a smattering of a bunch of different patterns. What I did is I went to the settings bar, the settings button right here, and I just went to reset gradients. And what it did is it reset it to these basic ones. So if you go to the first one, this one shows you foreground to background. So if I click on it, you'll see that it's using the foreground color and the background color. So over here, there are 5 different modes of styles of pattern, styles of gradient. if you would. The first one's the linear. So to apply it, I go from the top to the bottom. So you can see it goes from color, foreground color to background color. If I drag the line going up, let's see. Sorry, I want to make sure that that's up to normal. If I go from bottom to top, you can see that now it will go from bottom to top. If I go to the side, so you can see it'll constantly replace it. Now if I wanted to move the opacity down more, you could see it does sort of like an overlapping sort of effect. So you can see that as I keep adding more and more, kind of puts it on one on top of another. It's a nice effect. So it kind of waters down the gradient. And you can see the preview changes as well. If it's a checkerboard, that means it's a transparent. But if I bring the opacity to 100%, it's going to be fully covering it. You can also try different styles as well. This one's called the radial gradient. So you can see here that depending on how long the line is, it spreads out the gradient, real dense, but it does a circle pattern, radial gradient. This one is called the angled gradient, so it goes around clockwise. It starts off with the first color and ends at the second color. This next one's similar to linear, but it goes from, it has the dark color to the light color, or the foreground to the background, and foreground to background like a reflection. And the last one is very similar to radial gradient. It is a diamond gradient, and it does the same thing where the middle represents the center of the diamond, and as you spread it, pull out this line, it makes it, the gradient starts from the center out like a diamond. So you can certainly change some of the variables. I talked about changing the opacity. You can also, if you wanted to, try out different ones. This one right here is a rainbow one, and you can see it's transparent on the side. So you can see I'm on the diamond gradient, and don't forget, a lot of it's transparent, so that's why you could see the gradient doesn't cover up entirely. So one thing I do have to tell you is that when you start playing around with the different gradients, and let's say that you wanted to just go back to the paint bucket tool and dump the color in, the paint bucket won't work the way that you would expect. Because if I wanted to now just dump blue, it won't dump it on the whole thing. It'll just pick up different areas. So if you wanted to go back to the paint bucket or even apply a different gradient, at this point, your best bet is to clear out your background. To do this, the easiest way I find is that you can go to Image and go to Adjustments and Hue Saturation. Now that might not seem very simple, but the shortcut's Command U. So if you hit Command U, bring the lightness all the way up to the top, and what it does is it makes everything light. It's like filling it up with white. So when you go back to the gradients, you can explore different ones. Now if you wanted to change the colors, let's say I really like just two colors, keeping it simple, but I wanted to change the colors, what you can do is that you can change these colors by clicking, instead of this drop down menu, click the actual preview. So you can see here you have two stops. You have one here, one here. These are the colors. If you wanted to change the color of the stop, you double click. Let's say I want to do red to orange. Click on the stop, double click, changes to orange. And now you're using a different gradient. Okay, different color. You can do this for any of your presets, and you can do this for any of the patterns. You can even make up your own if you wanted to. If I wanted to add a stop, I can just click down below there, and I added a stop. I can change the color. So there's a lot of variations that you can do. The one thing, don't get too caught up in the different kinds of gradients that you can make, because don't forget, our main purpose is to provide a nice area for our letters. We don't want anything too busy that's going to take away from the letters of the name that we're doing. Okay, so that's all about gradients and Paint Bucket.